Will you pray with me? Gracious and holy God, this morning we gather in anticipation of the fall season. In anticipation of where you are leading us as we prepare for all the things that come as we end the year, but more importantly, in anticipation of how and where you are moving us together as a community. That this morning is not just about the music or the words that I say, but this is about you connecting, cultivating, and believing that you are leading us into something profound and holy together. So may we do that work together in community with one another. Amen. Friends, it is a joy to be with you this morning. If I haven't had the pleasure to meet you all, my name is Josh Esparza. I serve as one of the associate pastors here, and I was reappointed here in July. So if you're looking up front, be like, who's the new guy? That's why. And I don't take it personally. It's all good. But here's what I wanted to tell you all about this. The transition into this church has been incredible. That you all have been warm, you all have been hospitable, you all have invited me into the life and rhythms of our church, and you have said, hey, this is what we do really great. This is where we could grow, and this is where we hope to be. This is the church that we have been for 100+ years. This is who we are, and this is why I love my church. And in the ways that I've gotten to connect with you all, I've discovered the nuances of living in Allen, right? The line waiting out the door at Max's Donuts on a Sunday morning. I was like, this is the line to pay? Okay, I'll wait here. Or going to the Allen High School, the homecoming football game. It had been over a decade since I'd been to an Allen football game, right? Great time. But there have just been things. I keep hearing of the infamous garage, and I have strategically stayed away from that garage, knowing there's a lot there. I find the nooks and crannies of our church and see just small imprints of who we are and what we want to do. Even small things, subtle, like the crates that are outside this door that we use for collections for a variety of ways in which we support the ministries and life and partnerships of our church. And these transitions sometimes can feel difficult. It can feel like I'm learning a lot. It can feel like we don't quite understand who we are in this process, but you have not done that. You have shown me and engaged with me the opportunity to say, this is who we are as a church. And I have found this to be encouraging because we've been doing this work because we have been radically changed by God's grace and love. That we cannot help but engage in this work because we so deeply believe in the life and death and resurrection of Jesus, that we have been transformed and engaged in such profound ways that we have found meaningful spiritual community and formation in this place, that we want to invite other people into this space. We believe we have something to offer into these people amongst the city of Allen and Collin County. We believe that there's something special and holy happening here, which is not too dissimilar from the church throughout history. The church has grown, the church has made its presence throughout the world because they have so radically been changed and transformed by God's love. There was this compelling nature to share it with others. And what I love most of all as I've been doing this work with you all is I've been asking how you describe First Allen. What would you say about this church? Or more importantly, what do other people not connected to this church have to say about us? And the consistent theme across the board has been, we are a serving church. We are a church engaged in our community. We are a church who understands the needs of our people, and we mobilize to go and fulfill those needs. I think it's so beautiful that there's a church here who does not just continue to look inward, because that can be the temptation sometimes, to focus on ourselves, to do the work that we want to do, to nurture the communities that we have, and just make sure that what we're doing inside really solidifies. But rather you say we go and we move. And this question of how do you define your church, really, as I was sitting on it for a couple days in preparation for this morning, it reminded me of the question that Jesus asked his disciples. Who do you say that I am? And granted, I am not Jesus in this situation. But more importantly, I am recognizing the connections here. That we create categorizations, we create associations, and we become aware of the fruits of the labor. And so when I ask, who are we as a church? We are a church who's intentional of the needs of our people. And that is a holy thing. And so when we get into our text for this morning in John chapter 6, there's this miraculous story that is happening in the Gospel of John, the feeding of the 5,000, right? And what we see here is that John's got a narrative arc, right? If we've spent some time in the Gospel of John, we know that there is intention behind each gospel. And particularly in the Gospel of John, there is emphasis on a high Christology of Jesus, right? There is this understanding that Jesus' divinity is an important and purposeful part of this narrative, and we see that throughout the entire Gospel, that it must be known that Jesus is not just man, but is certainly, undoubtedly, 100% God also. And so in this text, we see this miracle taking place. And in this text, we see the feeding that is actually consistent across all the Gospels. We see it in the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and then we also see it here in John, which is unique for some of you because that doesn't always happen for us. We don't always see the same things happen across all the Gospels, but this story is consistent. And I find it purposeful here that the author of John, as we're talking into this miracle story, talks how the season of Passover is approaching. That Passover was commemorated as God's deliverance of Israel, and yet we see here in this story God's provision and care over God's people once again. And so what we know is that this is a story of miracles and a story with layers. So what do we know? How many people did Jesus feed in this miracle story? We just heard it. How many people did we feed? 5,000. Awesome. I knew you guys were paying attention. We got this. Love it. And one more thing. How did we feed the 5,000? What did Jesus use? Loaves and fishes. Okay. So now we're shaking here. So Jesus feeds the 5,000. Jesus takes these loaves and these fish and gives them so much so that they have plenty to eat, enough to fill 12 baskets of overflow. Is that the miracle that we read here in this story? Because here's the reality, friends, that Jesus could have turned any of the stones around him into bread. We actually read in the temptation story as Jesus is fasting and in the wilderness, and one of the other Gospels here that we see that the devil has this dialogue with Jesus. If you're so hungry, if you're so weak, why don't you just turn these stones into bread? There's this awareness of Jesus' divinity that can take something unable to be eaten and then be eaten. And we see in the Old Testament that there is a way in which God has provided for the people of Israel. We remember Passover, we remember the exile, we remember that manna just falls from the sky to sustain and care for the people of Israel in their wandering. That there is an opportunity for Jesus to feed in whatever capacity Jesus desired. But what does Jesus do here? Well, if we go back to our scripture, we see that this crowd is gathering as they are at a mountain. And Jesus asks Philip this question: where are we to buy bread for all these people to eat? Philip looks around and he's like, what are you talking about? 200 denarii, 6 months of wages couldn't feed these people. They barely have a little bit to eat. What are you talking about, Jesus? Why are you asking me where we can buy bread for us to eat? And this text says, Jesus knew the answer. But I wonder if Jesus was giving Philip an opportunity here. An opportunity to look beyond the immediacy that was present in front of him and to think with a little imagination. How are we going to feed 5,000? So then Andrew comes and enters the scene and says, there's a boy with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Maybe we can do something with that. And in our story, we read that Jesus multiplies the fish and the bread. He gives thanks for each of them, and he passes them to the people so that they may eat and eat plentiful. Is that our miracle? In this piece here, we see that Jesus distributes the bread himself. Jesus is giving himself extravagant abundance for all people, sharing God's divine love and connection with one another. And in this story, Jesus doesn't just see the needs of the people. Jesus sees an opportunity. And I wonder for us, what would it look like if we were to follow this example set by Jesus? What would it look like for us to change our perspectives and be a little intentional in the ways that we show up and connect with other people? Because what we see here with Jesus is that Jesus takes the gifts of this boy's bread and fish and multiplies them to many. Jesus doesn't say, let me just fix it and feed these people now. Jesus says, what is present within this community? There's these loaves and fish. Not enough, but some. And there's this multiplication that happens for all people to eat. And what I also find profound in the story is that this boy was willing to give his loaves and fish to Jesus. That there's a willingness here to give all that we have, even if it feels minute, and believe that God will multiply and make it faithful and impactful and purposeful for all people in ways we could never imagine or recognize. And Jesus enters into this space, says, what is here of the people that we can use? And we also need of the people a willingness, a faithfulness, a belief that we can be used in miraculous ways. Maybe that's our miracle, or at least part of the miracle. What we see here is an opportunity to reframe how we connect with one another. An opportunity to change the ways in which we engage with people, programs, opportunities. And not to say the way we do our work now isn't sufficient, not to say that it isn't good, but maybe there's something to add in addition to. Maybe there's something to add that allows us to recognize something more complexly, that allows us to dream broadly, that allows us to enter into the holy invitation that God is inviting us into. For some, you may have heard this, especially if you've been any part of the Good Neighbor experiment that our church has been through. There's this language that can be used to describe this as guest and host. And churches historically have been really good at being a host. Churches have been really good at creating programs, of creating ESL opportunities, of creating outreach pieces, creating opportunities in which we can serve the immediate needs of our people. And from my experience, we may struggle a little bit with being a guest. We may struggle with admitting we don't fully know everything. And I think this struggle is warranted because we so deeply care about the people around us. We so deeply care in the ways that we have been radically changed by God that we want this for other people. We want to create opportunities where, without a doubt, people know that they are loved by God 100%, that God's grace abounds 100%, and there's nothing you can ever do to separate you from the love of God. And so sometimes we enter into these spaces creating these programs, these opportunities, these solutions, in hopes that people may experience that. And sometimes people do, and that is holy work. But when they don't, there's an opportunity there also. Because to be a guest means to be a little uncomfortable. To be a guest means things are a little unfamiliar. To be a guest means things may be particularly vulnerable for us. And to be a guest, we might even feel a little out of place or exposed. So it makes sense why we wouldn't be great at being a guest, especially if we're not being intentional with that. In my previous church, one of the things that we did really faithfully was serve and connect with the elementary school next door. And I love that that's something that our church continues to do now with Boyd Elementary. But in this church, one of the first things I wanted to do was I really wanted to immerse myself in our community. And so what I did shortly after getting appointed there is I just started volunteering in the elementary school every week. I started spending time with the librarian, and the librarian knows everything, everybody. In case you didn't know, knows all the students, knows all the parents, knows all the tea, right? All the things. And so I quickly ingratiated myself with the librarian, and I would spend every Wednesday afternoon with her. But through that time, I would also spend time with the administration, got to know the principal and vice principal really well. Through that time, really created a really beautiful relationship with the community liaison, and there was mutuality in that. There were ways that we showed up for them, and there were ways that they actively showed up for us in our work. And of course, as you're around for any period of time, they say, hey, you want to be a part of our site-based decision-making committee? And you're like, I don't know what that is. And they say, oh, it's like a PTA, but we don't have a PTA, but we need some governance. We need some buy-in from parents and community leaders. Yes, I would love to. Great, you're the chair. Okay. So these meetings are happening monthly as well. And this meeting, it was primarily myself, a couple other leaders who spoke English, and then the majority of the families, their mothers were present. There were Latina mothers who spoke Spanish as their first language and either didn't speak English or didn't feel comfortable speaking English. So typically these meetings would be translated back and forth. The liaison would start in English, give us our stuff, then translate it to Spanish, and then we would just go back and forth. Worked really well. So one meeting, I show up, it's just me and these Latina moms. I was like, okay, we're vibing. So then the liaison begins, and she starts to lead the meeting, and she says it in Spanish, and then she says it in English, and then she says it in Spanish, and then she's going back to English. I'm looking at the room, and I'm like, I think she's just doing this for me. I don't think anyone else needs this in English. She goes back into Spanish, and she's coming back to translate it back in English, and I say, Jessica, I really appreciate you translating. My Spanish is okay, right? I feel like I can hold my own pretty well. It's not great, but I think I can hold my own. Why don't you just lead this meeting in Spanish, and I will just figure it out. Jessica graciously agrees, and she's leading this meeting in Spanish, and periodically she's coming back and be like, do you understand what I just said? You got it? And I'm like, yeah, I got it. I don't got it. I don't know what she's saying. And there was conviction there, right? I was lying that I said I understood because I didn't want to show up in a way where I looked inferior, or I didn't want to admit that I didn't know, where I didn't want to admit that I needed her to speak slowly sometimes, where I needed to interrupt her at times and say, can you say that again, or can you translate that? And about halfway through the meeting, I started doing these things, and it was vulnerable. I felt exposed. I felt like I couldn't hang. And there was this moment afterwards where I was thinking to myself, and these moms live every day like that. These moms living in Texas and Dallas where Spanish is a secondary language, but it's not a primary language. Or they may feel intimidated to get things wrong, to say it in the wrong tense, or to not have the right verb. Where they may not know, so they're not going to be able to speak up, and they have to navigate most of their lived reality, not really being confident in themselves. And that moment showed me how significant those gaps are, what it looks like to place yourself in these positions and recognize, I can't. Speaking with people is not something I have a hard time with. Speaking with people in a different language, a little more difficult. There was awareness, there was a shape, there was an influence in that experience that changes how I do my ministry. There's an opportunity for us to enter into the spaces where we know our people are present, to be there, to be a listener, to be curious, and to be a guest, and to learn, and not present as if we have all the answers. And in that exchange, discover something new and holy. This sermon series, Having Nothing, Possessing Everything, is based off of Mike Mather's book, which, if it's not in Missions Cafe, it will be. I know Adam has ordered it. But this book was really profound because it invited us to expand the way we do the work of the church. It invited us to enter into the spaces where people are and to be curious about where is God moving? How can we be conduits of that? How can we be evangelists to that? How can we be imaginative in that work together so that we make whole and continue to cultivate a more flourished community filled with abundance? So I want to share a quote from his book, and we'll get a little deeper in next week, but I want to share this. It says, "Neighbors who used the gifts of other neighbors began to see the abundance that was both around them and within themselves. Also, when people from the outside the neighborhood went inside and hired someone to cook a meal or bought a piece of art or got their nails done, they began to see ostensibly needy people as artists, economists, musicians, chefs, and entrepreneurs." Friends, we all have something passionate, something profound that we carry. And sometimes life gets in the way and we forget that those things exist. And when we get to be curious with one another, when we get to ask, what is the thing that makes you come alive? What is something you'd be willing to share with other people? Then we begin to see a level of connection and empowerment where people truly do grow because of the abundance we have here together. But this is an opportunity to continue in God's holy work. This is an opportunity to continue in the ways that we serve our community in ways that may cause other people to look back and say, why does First Allen do it that way? Why does it look a little different from the way everyone else does it? And that's not to say we have to do it right away. It's not to say we have to change things tomorrow. But this book, this opportunity is present for us to think, dialogue, and imagine what else is God leading us into. So if you pick up that book and you read through it and you want to have some conversation about it, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to take you out for some coffee. I'd love to go through it together. I'd love to share my experiences in this work. And more importantly, I'd love to hear what your interpretation is, what your perspective is, and how you believe that we can continue to do this work together. Because friends, when we serve our community, the reality is, and I worked in the nonprofit space also, we tend to highlight how much better they are or what we did. Those are the things we put on our social media posts. Those are the things we put on grant reports so we can get funding for the next time. Those are the things we put before Sunday school so that they may continue to give faithfully. Those are the things we put before our UMW groups, etc. Those are the things we have. This is what we did. This is how people have been changed. And that matters. It's important. It quantifies our impact. But maybe that doesn't have to be the only thing that we talk about. What if we measured how many partnerships and how many people we ask to come work with us as we do this work? The ministry of Jesus, this miracle in John 6, the book that Mike wrote, gives us an opportunity to expand the way we look at missions and community engagement. So friends, wouldn't it be a miracle if our communities felt empowered as they are helped? May it be so. Amen.